Should young players, we're talking under 14, under 16 and minor, do isolated conditioning or running without the ball to get fitter? When I'm talking about this, I mean not to develop speed, but to develop generally aerobic fitness to help them play the game? Or should the majority of it be done through games, drills and other activities that include the ball as much as possible? I want to answer this. There's a few different people have asked me questions like, I'm coaching under 14 team, what type of running should they be doing? And I never have an answer for it because it's so out there. There's so many other things to consider. Also, I've given a good few different physical fitness modules on Award 2 coaching courses, both in hurling and football, around the province of Leinster. And I always like to finish up with this. I try and set it up as a bit of a debate, but just pop the question up on the board. 14, 16 minor, should they be doing some running and should they be doing it without the ball? And I'm always surprised at the responses. I usually expect a lot of people to be like, no, everything they should do should be with the ball, through small-sided games, drills, well-designed, ensuring that there's a lot of work being done to develop most of their fitness. But in general, most people say yes, there is generally a justification for doing it. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper. Am I largely working with biased samples when I'm doing it there, like Award 2 coaches? Are they at the stage where they just know how to design stuff a little bit better and they're really refined on what it is they want and need to top that up with fitness? Or is there a bit more to it? So I asked the question across a few different platforms to see, is there any variety in answers? I sent out an email at least once a week, sometimes twice, and I just included it as a little questionnaire there. Should underage players do conditioning for general fitness, not for speed? Just to caveat this, if you want to get faster, you have to do some form of run without the ball, generally, to get faster. That goes across the ages. You can set it up as races, whatever you like. There doesn't need to be too much of a huge focus on technique. That will often come from the intent and from something you actually want to chase down. But if you want to get faster, you will generally have to do some form of run without the ball. But for general fitness, that's what this is focused around. So I asked on my email list, I did an Instagram poll on my story and a Twitter poll just to see what are the responses out there and do they vary much. And I asked for a bit of feedback from different people as well, just to see what would they come back with and what were the different justifications for the answers that were given. And they were actually, across the three platforms, very similar. They weren't the exact same ones because I set one up as a questionnaire so you can have more responses. But in general, across the three, 80% across all three platforms said yes, they should be doing some form of running, but the majority caveated that with but in the right context. So I think I had 7% said no, 14% said no, there might be some circumstances, or no, definitely not, in the email list. I had 13% on Instagram said no way, and actually really respect to 11% of people there said, I'm unsure, I don't know. I think that's great to say. We don't do enough of that, just saying straight up, I don't know. I'm not sure what's best here. I would like to know more, but currently I don't have an opinion on this because I don't know enough about it. And we should definitely look to do more of that. And on Twitter, really similar. Again, 80% said yes, either yes definitely or yes in the right context, and then 12% said no way. I think the big thing here was 55 to 70% of people said has to be done in the right context. So before we dig into some of the responses, just a few notes made out here, and I'll start off with we need to understand that most of our beliefs and what we feel is right or wrong or should be done or is best to do in certain cases are shaped by our own past experiences and where we've come from. I asked around in work as well, some of the other lecturers that I'd just be chatting to and ask their opinions on it, see what they think. And I could tell from some of the Instagram responses too, that a lot of the yes definitelys were from people who came from athletics backgrounds. So obviously enough there, you just see running in its own right as something that's really important because you've done it to get better solely at running, not for the purpose of getting better at any other type of sport, but purely for running, as is done in athletics. And that was from, while I can't be certain, there's actually no one who said no gave me any kind of follow up on it. But I would guess an awful lot of people who said no probably come from backgrounds where at some stage in their youth they did an awful lot of running that they just really didn't enjoy, and it was probably a lot of too hard running without any real value or context or any explanation on why they're doing it other than you need to do this to get fitter. And I'll just give a story. I remember when we used to run a winter under 13 league in Carlow, and my first year on it, I was 9, and me and another 9-year-old, we were the youngest two on the panel, and the coach did loads of running and training. It was more of a fitness training session than any kind of hurling. And My first year as coach, I would look back on that and said, oh my God, that was awful. But realistically, it was just one of the other players' mothers. She didn't know anything else to do. She said, oh, I'll keep them busy with running. That'll tire them out. They'll go home tired and everyone think, oh, great session. But she left me and the other 9-year-old out of all the running because she said, oh no, they're too young. They don't have to do all this. So we just spent most of the training just kind of chatting to each other while all the other lads did like a lot of really hard fartlek interval type runs, which in hindsight, like there's no way 10, 11, 12-year-olds should be doing a load of that. But if you've gone through something like that, because I got to sit out of it all, I was like, great, I just get to poke around and chat to my friend here. Whereas the 10 or 11-year-olds who are doing all the running, I would imagine they're the type now who say, no, you definitely shouldn't be doing isolated running. It should all be done with the ball. Because at that age, it would have been so much more enjoyable for everyone had it been done with the ball. I did note, and Dave here actually replied to me a tweet. He says, he's no issue with doing running, particularly if you think it's done in the right context. But if you go to athletics training, you're going to sign up to do some running. You're doing some running there. Whereas if you're doing GA training, some people might perceive that as being a bad thing. Whereas it's the same thing, but in one sense perceived as bad, in one sense the other. And dead right. However, I would caveat it with the fact that if you sign up to athletics and you go running and you're surprised that's expected, I don't know what you're expecting to come from athletics. Sure, if you're signing up to say, yeah, I'm going to turn up here, I'm going to go to a cross-country race. Yeah, you have to run 3K. What? I have to run? Obviously, you're going to have to run if you're signing up for athletics. Isolated run without anything else there. Whereas in GA, like if you sign up to play Gaelic football or hurling, now you're going to do this running, you might be more likely to think, wait, I came here to play hurling or to play football. Why am I doing this running? So you can see a little bit why it may raise eyebrows in some circumstances. I will say that like in my first few years coaching, particularly my second year, I did do some isolated running with the under 16s. And that wasn't so much like, oh, I definitely need to get them fitter. It's because like starting out, you're not as clear on how to show definite improvements through all the skills and games that you're doing. And this was like, 2013 or 14. So I just didn't know near as much as you would 10 or 11 years later. But there just wasn't as much out there. When you think of the likes of Philip Kerr and all he puts and Colin Nally and all that stuff, and how you can show how they are getting better at skills or they are getting better at various game situations through the questions you might ask. Because there wasn't as much of that out there to guide how you show improvements in fitness or improvements in the game that's being played. Whereas you could show a true fitness by just saying, you did that 3 weeks ago, now you've done it quicker, or it's easier doing the same thing. So it's an objective way of showing some form of improvement. They weren't super hard, and by and large, the players really enjoyed it because, we did it up in different ways of like making them competitive with each other, races, little team-based stuff, really low-level obstacle-based things. But realistically, just as an experienced coach, I didn't really, like obviously I was doing all of the sport, but other than like your isolated drills, playing matches and backs and forwards, and some running, I just wasn't as aware of what else was out there to show improvements. Whereas over time, and with just far more guidance that's out there now, there's an awful lot more to do that. To look at this then in terms of like actual facts that are out there, looking at a bit of research, putting on like the PE teacher's hat and everything, there's honestly very little out there, published research on levels of fitness in Irish adolescents. It's not something we do in Ireland. We don't track it. Like there isn't a database of, here is the current level of, the current standard of fitness levels in Irish 13-year-olds and Irish 15-year-olds and Irish 17-year-olds, and here how it has declined from 1995 or 1975, because we just don't have any way of testing it, or it's not done, it's not funded. Any way it is funded is by one-off researchers saying, I want to go and do this study or these series of studies, and you have to go away and find the funding yourself and set up the studies. There isn't a national database or bank of doing it. There is like some of Brendan O'Keefe's work, which he did on when he was looking at fitness testing specifically, but that was in a mix of schools, and it's not just those who play sport, it's 13-year-olds in general. And we do also have the stuff from the YPAT studies that were done. While none of those are from specific GA backgrounds or general population, there was some work published by around normative data in county minors by Brian Cullen, but that's obviously a biased population. It's, I would guess, the double minor footballers from a few years ago. Like they're not normal to say, oh yeah, these are this fitness level. They are higher level minor county players who've been selected out from a very large population. You can't use them as a standard bearer of fitness levels amongst underage players in Ireland either. I will say, going off some of the norms that are out there for health, and these are like European-wide standards published for health, from doing testing in schools, the majority of GA players tend to be way ahead in terms of fitness level, aerobically or cardiovascularly, ahead of what the norms suggest. So you're saying, like, does that mean they're fit enough for their sport? We don't know, because it's very hard to know what specifically is fit enough for the sport of either hurling or Gaelic football or LGFA or camogie at a young age by putting specific markers on that. Because we don't have enough information out there. I know Leinster GA were looking a few years to compile bits from development squads. I can't find anywhere that was published. I know a few people have done different studies. I'd say they're sitting in theses in the Carlow IT or potentially some of the, or ACTU Carlow repositories, but I don't know anywhere any of that has been published for people to access. And even then, it's probably 8 years ago. Things have changed a lot since, in terms of like even the metrics you might look at. It's really important to understand whether you're saying yes or no, or you're somewhere in the middle. The context as to why they may be running is probably the most important thing. I wouldn't actually think that yes, they should run or no, they shouldn't run is the real answer here. It's having a justification for whatever it is you have decided is realistically what makes the most important here. And it's going to vary a bit from under 14 through to minor. Like at under 14, you may have 11 or 12 year olds playing there. At minor, depending on your county, it might be under 17, it might be under 18. Some of those under 18s could be playing adult. It's very likely they are doing some form of running in training, if it be at county minor level or with their adult club team. If they are training with their adult club team, some form of isolated condition is like, I'd be shocked if it's not happening in most club teams. So if you have some 17 or 18 year olds training with their adult team, it's very unlikely they're not doing the condition. I doubt the manager or the coach is saying, right, you're stepping out of this because you're only 17. They probably are doing it there. And even then in the case, you might need to at minor do some of the condition just straight up to prepare them for what's to come in training a year later. When you go back training in January or March or April, and you've a load of lads who've come through from minor the previous year, in an ideal world, if they haven't done condition when younger, you might look to build them up for maybe 50% of the running for the first couple of weeks and gradually tailor that up to match what the older players are doing. But even in the best thought out clubs or with the best plans in place, I don't think that's happened because it's really difficult to manage. You're better off just thinking, okay, at minor, they probably should do some form of running here, partly to be fit for playing minor this year, but also to understand this is something that's going to happen when you play adult next year. And instead of being a big shock to the system, let's have you somewhat prepared physically for this as it does come in. In the younger ages, particularly 14, 16, that's when the why becomes really, really important. And we're going to dig into that now. When it came to preparing for this, I wanted to not just rely on what people responded to via social media or that. I want to reach out to a few people specifically whose opinion I would value a lot. So one particularly experienced coach at adult level and at underage. And what are your thoughts on this? And he gave a good example of his nephew's training. He plays under 14 hurling, football and soccer. Three different clubs, it's a split club, say for GA. And he just said they have to run. If they don't run, they will be so bad because their training is so ineffective in terms of how much activity they do in training. And he's like, with the best of intentions, the coach is there, goes up, has these drills, wants them to do well, but he's watched a few sessions, and even though they go on really long, he's like, they're doing so little here in terms of their hurling and football activities. They're getting no real physical output from any of it. Hence, they have to do some form of running, or there's no way they'd cope with any of the game demands that are there. And this is from a combination of a lot of drills where they're just is a lot of standing around. There's a lot of large-sided games where a couple of players might dominate it, or there's just a good bit of standing around in groups talking, or not even talking, listening to a coach, and they're leading to very little fitness benefits from the training. Hence why I would term fitness top-ups are required, but it's just a case of they're becoming unfit or they're not developing fitness from the training they're currently doing because it's not effective enough. Therefore, to try and drive some improvements in fitness, the coach is doing a lot of extra running. Whereas with some tweaks in their training, which would obviously be better, they could get fitter from the work they are doing. But that will take a bit of time. It does take a little bit longer to develop fitness from some of your game-based stuff to ensure you're getting something decent on the game and skill end as well as the physical. This could be helped a lot just by better training session design, some small-sided games, some better thought-out drills, just a little bit more snappiness to the training in general. But sometimes fitness levels do need to be brought up to make sure the games and other activities you're doing are effective. Like sometimes you might have a group who's really, really unfit and you're trying to do a lot of small-sided games with them, and either because skill levels are low or fitness levels are low or both, they just don't work out, and it's really hard to get something effective from all those because they're just not prepared enough technically or physically to get the benefits from the games, which they may need to do a little bit of work on first to get those full benefits. One of the situations where there can be quite a disparity in terms of fitness levels in a group is if you've a large group of multisport players, or there are some multisport players in the group that you're training. So if you have a few who are playing, and I mean like playing an awful lot of sports, not signed up to a few, not just like doing, they play hurling but they kick around a bit of soccer on the side. I mean actually playing a number of sports, then because their activity levels are so high, there's a good chance there's no extra fitness level, no extra fitness work required because they're just so active from the sports they play. It's probably more case if you actually need to look at how much they're doing and think, let's pull them back a little bit here because they're doing so much activity, they're not really coping with a lot of it and they are likely to burn out from some of the bits they're doing. You could dedicate some of that extra time to skill work, or depending on what the sport is. If you're an awful lot of one sport, skills in another area I wouldn't say suffer, but maybe in greater need of development. But if you have a team where some of your group play a lot of sports and get a load of activity from that, but some of them only play the one sport, then there can be a disparity, say, in the fitness levels. That can be really difficult to manage. This may look like big gaps in playing ability just because some are way fitter than others. They're covering ground easier. Playing the sport itself is easier because they are fitter and more physically prepared for it because of all the other activity they're doing. Straight up, some isolated run would definitely help narrow that gap, but can be really difficult to do in terms of how you, I suppose, psychologically sell this to the players who don't play any other sports. And the gaps there will often widen. Like the players who play a number of sports probably play a number of sports because they're already good at one or two, and that's why they're selected or asked or recruited to play others. Whereas those who are maybe below average, and like there can be numerous ways of saying that that's the wrong term to use, but whatever term you want to use, they're probably not playing as many because they're just not as good at sports. To just focus on fitness, try and improve that, will be a help, but it's definitely not going to be the main thing that's going to drive their improvements. Also, it's very difficult to do that without making it look like punishment. These are really good, you're not as good, let's go do some running to make you better. Number one, while it's good to show them that hard work does pay off, just focus on fitness may not be the best way to show them where all of the improvements will come from, although some will definitely. So you have a choice here. Do you give them suggested work to do on the nights the others? So say if you're coaching a hurling team and some of them are off playing rugby and soccer, the nights the others are off playing rugby or soccer, do you say to just the hurlers, you should be, here's some suggested work you could go and do on those nights? Or we can come down here, the 6 or 8 of you who don't play soccer, do you want to come down here? We'll do some small-sided games because there's nothing else we can do with the small numbers, a couple of drills, and we might do some extra running. You can put stuff like that in, but that's also a drain on your time when you're already given 2 to 3 nights a week with that underage team. And you're conscious of as well, you don't want them just playing hurling all the time because it can be a little bit too much for them and they may get stale from it. Where it can work is if the players themselves look for extra running, or you plant somewhat of a seed that they think they should be asking for more, and then you can support them by giving them the extra work there. And there's any amount of stuff you can do here. It can be extra runs, it can be just any form of aerobic work, it can be looking for a local fitness class. Like what the extra work here isn't actually hugely important once it's not doing any direct damage. Just increase their overall activity levels in a way that won't have any negatives and is something they'll enjoy is the real key here. Not just saying, here's the best intervals to make up for not playing soccer or not playing rugby on a Tuesday night when the other players are, but just generally encouraging them to find more ways to be active while all the others or a number of the others are active in other sports. To look back down the ages a bit more then is to still ask the big question, why are they running? And I'd ask that if you think the fitness is the key to competitive advantage at underage, you might be right in the short term. If at under 16 you're fitter than all the other teams in the competition, you do have a good chance of being more successful here, but I partly say at what cost, but to what long-term benefit are you getting from that? And let's just think, this tends to be a big thing under 14. Think of the early maturers in any team. They're big, strong, fast, athletic under 14s that just look more talented than everyone else. they're often not near as good by the time they reach minor, because a lot of the other players have caught up to them in terms of size and athleticism and just general looking not as talented as they were, but realistically they're probably every bit as big and athletic as they were. Everyone else has just caught up. And because they've focused because they have this physical advantage over all the others, that's their get out of jail card. When they're in situations that are difficult to cope with, they use the fitness to get out of those. When that's no longer an option at 17, 18 or 19, they haven't often developed the required sport-specific skills or movement-based skills to get out of those situations that some of the not younger players, but smaller players develop, because they don't have the same level of athleticism or size or strength to get out of that. You can look at similar on just general fitness. You can wear a team down. You can just cover more ground and be less tired in the end of the game if you focus on fitness. But there's only a finite amount of training time you can dedicate to everything. Like max, you're probably going to train 3 nights a week with an underage, and that's a lot for a lot of under 14, 16 teams. If you want to get to a level where you are way fitter, or even a bit fitter than all of the other teams, to dedicate the time to that means you have to pull away from game-specific stuff, such as skills, decision-making, tactical stuff, team play, everything that way. Getting that physical win or burst or step ahead of all the others will have an advantage at 15, 16, 17, but once you get to 19, 20, 21, everyone at the higher levels is doing all of the physical work, but they're doing the physical work on top of, you would hope, the technical skills, the tactical decision making, the team play, all of that. If you've gotten your physical jump younger, but you haven't developed all the skills, they are much, much harder to develop in the older ages, because it's just harder to dedicate the specific time to that, having already given a lot of time to physical stuff much earlier. And there'll also be a degree of frustration and lack of motivation around, how come we had that advantage a few years ago? Why don't we have it now? Can we just try and get fitter again? But ultimately, it just becomes a case of like, you're not able to squeeze any more juice out of that lemon. Think of like, why doesn't the marathon world record just keep falling? Because you end up kind of reaching ceilings in terms of what physical adaptations or improvements you can make. I would say we're getting quite close to that in terms of the top levels of Gaelic football now. They are so fit. It's very difficult to know, will any team be fitter than the top teams are now or have been over the last couple of years. But you do want that ceiling to come in adulthood. You don't want to put that ceiling on players when they're younger. At 15, 16, 17, you want to give them as much skill and decision-making opportunities there as possible, with some physical sprinkled in, so then you can push the physical limits that bit further in adulthood when there just isn't as much room. Not to say it can't be improved, but there isn't potentially as much room for the other improvements there. I was doing a session one night last year, it was a bit of a speed session with an adult team. I was doing a favour for a coach, and there was a camogie team training beside us. And I was just chatting to the coach of the camogie team afterwards, and he was saying, we just put so much effort on fitness this year. We went back training earlier, we did a lot of early morning sessions. We said we're going to just be the hardest working team, and that's brilliant. Like, you want to see all that in them. But I remember looking at some of the players, and there were so many like small technical issues that if they'd looked to spend like a couple of weeks trying to improve these, there would have been massive benefits, like the length of their strike and how much quicker they would have gotten shots away instead of just being slower with hands, 4 inches apart, and the feet were just all off when they went to make strikes. And a small bit of work there, and then put fitness on top of that, would have had like double or triple the improvements, instead of just the fitness at the start and not looking to do any other improvements after. I was like, let's work hard, but without any thought around the game plan, the technical developments, anything that way. If you're lacking a bit skill-wise and you're planning to be more competitive than all the other teams is just to get fitter than them, it'll give you a bit of a boost at the start, but won't work for the long term, and ultimately you're putting a ceiling on where your players can go, and they will find it very difficult to make the bigger improvements in adulthood if their skills are what prevent them from kicking on a level or two. Whereas if they have all those skills when they're younger, and then you can layer more and more fitness on top of that and decision making, ideally all together, as you get older. Where I think it does become really important, and this is one of the big things that when I ask this in the War 2s is generally the good point, or one of the stronger points to come back, is if you're in a competitive league, and I think like some of the stronger counties here, and your under 16 team is in Division 1, to be somewhat competitive, you probably are going to have to do some form of running. Because if every other team you're going to play against is running, like doing some isolated running, and they're skillful, and they've big populations, they're picking majority 15 and 16-year-olds for a majority of games, just to be competitive in that league, you're going to have to do some form of physical work alongside all your skill, technical, tactical work, just to cope with the work capacity demands that are there. But bear in mind, there's 30 players on the pitch and one ball. So realistically, the majority of the work on the field is done without the ball anyway, but it's really important to remember, all of that running is affected by the ball. If you're a cornerback and you're not interested in touching the ball, you're just interested in stopping your man from touching the ball, all your runs are still guided by what the ball is doing further out the field. So even if you're thinking, oh sure, I'm not going to touch the ball, I don't want to touch the ball, I just want to do loads of running, it still does depend on what your man is doing, and what he's doing is dependent on what the players on his team further out the field are doing with the ball in terms of what they're likely to deliver, what they're holding up, what runs they're trying to make. So it does, while a lot of running is done without the ball, it does shape the context of those runs that are done. I'd be very wary of having younger players on older teams. So for example, I'd be from a parish where we just don't have the population to play all players up to the age. There will often be 13-year-olds playing under 16. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, if you're playing against a bunch of 15, 16-year-olds, that your team are unfit. What a 15-year-old can do versus what a 13-year-old can do on the same pitch are vastly different. It's not that the 13-year-old is unfit, they're just smaller and they're not capable of doing what older players are. And because they're not capable of it, it probably means the 15, 16-year-olds on your team have to do an awful lot more, therefore get tired much earlier. It's not a case they're unfit, they're just doing more to make up for the fact that the 13-year-olds can't cope with those physical demands. It's very likely they're all unfit. They'll probably end up fitter in the long run for doing all that extra work against players who are just older than them. It's like saying, don't burn the Christmas turkey. If you look at your turkey and it takes 4 hours to cook, you can't put it in for 3 hours and turn up the heat. It doesn't cook quicker just by turning up the heat. It takes as long as it takes. And just by turning up that heat, you do a lot of damage. The same will be said if you try and force extra conditioning too early, or try and squeeze too much in with players that are too young. But like I said, up to the age, trying to be competitive in a Division 1 league where you're trying to get somewhat competitive games against others who are doing a lot of work, to cope with those demands, you may have to do the extra physical work alongside some good technical, tactical work that does have a lot of physical stuff there. Some people may look at players' viewpoint and getting their feedback on this. If you ask young players most things, they will give the answer they expect to be right. So if you ask a bunch of 15-year-olds, should you be doing some extra running? They'll probably just look at their local senior team or another local high-performing team, see them do a lot of extra running and think to themselves, well, yes, we should. The seniors do it, so we should do it. They often just assume they should be doing the same training as what adults are, but there are developmental stages there for reasons that you build up to doing all that. They often just don't know what's best around like slightly more nuanced situations in that way. Also, if you ask the players, those who are really fit and probably already really good will say, yeah, definitely, of course we should be doing more running, because it's something those individuals are really good at. So they'll be delighted to do more running because it's probably not quite as hard for them, and if they're better than everyone else, like realistically, we all like doing stuff we're better than most other people at because we feel quite comfortable and get confidence boost in that situation. If you ask the players who are the least fit on the team, they'll probably say, yes, we should be doing running out of guilt because they think, oh, I'm not very fit. Yes, we should be doing it. But is it something they want to do? More than likely not. Whereas the players who are good at it will say, yes, I do want to do more because it's something they just enjoy doing. A few final words on this. Realistically, every age wants hard-working players. The players who are going to go out and work themselves into the ground to make the next tackle, to run off the ball, to chase down breaks, whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't do all the extra running or work hard or have to be minded in any way. It's just that at the younger ages, it's more important to try and develop them to develop skillful, tactically smart players who can also work hard. That should still be the emphasis. You want them to be really good at their sport and work hard alongside that, as opposed to just working hard and maybe not having all of the tools you want available to them to go and excel. Like, we all love the player that dogs themselves with effort on the field, but they maybe struggle to kick or hit a score when they get into that shooting position because they don't have the requisite skill set to do that. But what if we could try and spend a bit of time giving them that skill set when they're younger and then go out and do all the hard work alongside it with those skills to use it in the right situation? Realistically, there's no issue with some running. it's important for everyone to be cardiovascularly fit and healthy, whether they play a sport, whether they play a GA or not. We need to be mindful of those who are really active through a number of other sports or other activities they're doing that might not be sport but just lead to a lot of activity. But then also be mindful of the players who might struggle to get in a lot of extra activity because they don't play other sports, or maybe even sometimes because of the position they play. Let's be mindful of goalkeepers who may not actually cover that much distance or get much activity in over the course of a traditional training session. But it's really important how we sell it to players here and the parents themselves. Don't just be telling players, you're unfit, we're going to do more running, because realistically, what are you basing that on? There's no test with a definite line that says above this fit enough, below this not fit enough. It's too much of a grey area. You may have developed targets yourself, and if you're sure, based on whatever test it is and whatever targets you've set, and you've worked on those over a few years, and you know there what's important, then by all means use that. But be sure there's real guidance around that, and there's real evidence for yourself, not say like publish stuff or anything like that, but don't just take the word of a coach who says they should all get this time in a 1.2k test or cover this or get to this level in the yo-yo test or anything that way, because there can't be a definitive line there based on position, individual person, anything like that. It definitely shouldn't take away from the technical or tactical development. That's still really important. And let's remember, they should try, where possible, to be developed together, but they don't always need to develop together every single time. Sometimes it's good to do some low intensity work to develop the decision making or the skill, or both together. And bear in mind that fitness with the ball doesn't mean you're just trying to make players really tired with the ball involved. Sometimes there might be no fitness benefits whatsoever there. Players are just getting tired. I'd also be wary enough of saying doing a lot of extra physical work builds mental toughness. I'm not convinced that's the case, and I've spoken to a few sports psychologists on this. I would ask the question, are you mentally tougher, or is it just easier because you're fitter? And if that's the case, and that's just the justification you want to use, then by all means go on for it. But I think mental toughness is very situation specific, and doing an awful lot of running may not help you keep your composure in the final minutes of a game when you're under massive pressure there. I just don't think there's enough concrete links between the two of those. In an ideal world, most young players wouldn't need to do extra running. They'll be playing a number of sports, one of which will be athletics or something endurance based, and that will give them a lot of the conditioning levels they need for whatever other sports they're playing, plus the sports would dovetail together in terms of the night they train on, the seasons they work through, so that they could play a number of things and it all benefit each other. But as we know from the previous podcast I had where P.T. Shaw was on, but also knowing what's out there in the world, that's not the case, and therefore we may need to add stuff in, but let's have a bit of thought around how specifically we do it, how much we do, how it's sold to the players and the parents, how we inform it, and how much of it we do to some players. Because aerobic work should not be a bad thing. It's really good for your health, but let's ensure it's right for everyone and it's not coming at the cost of any any technical or tactical work that also needs to be developed, and it's probably more of a priority in the younger ages.